"Break the door," the officer said, his voice flat and certain, and the quiet suburban street seemed to hold its breath as 30 police cruisers idled in a tight line along the curb, their red and blue lights washing over the pale siding of a modest one-story house like a storm that hadn't yet decided to break. Neighbors watching from behind half-drawn blinds, coffee mugs forgotten in their hands, while on the small wooden porch Angela Brooks stood barefoot against the cool planks, the early morning air still carrying the faint chill of dawn, her gray t-shirt stirring slightly in the breeze, her posture straight but unthreatening, as if she were simply waiting for a delivery rather than facing a wall of uniforms and authority. And for a moment nothing moved except the slow flicker of those lights reflecting in the glass of her front window, and the soft crackle of radios clipped to belts, murmuring codes and confirmations that felt larger than the street itself. Officer Daniel Reeves stepped forward from the line, his polished boots precise against the pavement, his expression set in that practiced neutrality that came from years of believing the badge spoke louder than any question, his hand resting near his radio as he looked up at her not with curiosity, but with decision already made, as if the outcome had been written before anyone arrived. And Angela met his gaze without flinching, not defiant, not pleading, just present, her eyes steady in a way that didn't match the situation, a calm that didn't belong in a moment like this. And somewhere down the block a car engine shut off abruptly, as if even the neighborhood understood something was off. Reeves raised his chin slightly, signaling without words, and 2 officers shifted closer to the walkway, their steps measured, rehearsed, while the faint hum of electricity from the streetlights above mixed with the distant sound of a morning news helicopter passing far overhead, unnoticed by everyone except the one person who didn't seem to belong to the tension at all, Angela Brooks, who slowly drew in a breath and let it out through her nose, her fingers relaxed at her sides, not clenched, not shaking, just still, and that stillness spread in a strange way, as if the chaos around her couldn't quite land, as if the scene itself was waiting for something else to enter it, something unseen, something no one in uniform had accounted for. And Reeves finally spoke again, louder this time, authority filling the space between them, telling her to step aside, to comply, to make this easy, words that echoed off the siding and seemed to fall short before reaching her, because she didn't move, not yet. Instead she tilted her head just slightly, studying him the way someone might study a map that didn't quite match the terrain, and for a brief second, so quick it could have been missed, uncertainty flickered beneath his composure, then disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced again by command, by certainty, by the weight of 30 officers standing behind him, and Angela's lips parted just enough to speak, her voice low but clear in the quiet, carrying farther than it should have in that charged stillness. "Are you sure you want to do this, officer?" And the question didn't sound like fear or resistance. It sounded like a warning wrapped in calm, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be heard. And somewhere in the line of patrol cars, a radio hissed sharply before cutting to silence, like a signal waiting for the right moment to break through. Reeves did not answer her question right away, and that silence stretched thin across the front yard like a wire pulled too tight, the kind that could snap or sing depending on what came next. He shifted his weight slightly, glancing over his shoulder as if to confirm the presence behind him. 30 officers, 30 sets of eyes, 30 quiet reinforcements that made hesitation feel unnecessary. And yet something in the way Angela stood there, barefoot on weathered wood, made the moment resist. His control, the porch light above her flickered once as the early sun edged higher over the rooftops, casting a pale gold line across the street that cut through the flashing red and blue, softening it, blurring it, turning what should have looked like dominance into something uncertain. "Ma'am, this is your final warning," Reeves said, his voice firm but not raised, the tone of someone who expected compliance because the world had always answered him that way. A low murmur passed between the officers behind him, radios clicking, boots shifting against gravel, someone adjusting their grip on a clipboard, another checking a watch, small human movements that contrasted with the scale of the scene they were creating. Angela's gaze moved briefly past Reeves, not in fear, not searching for escape, but as if she were taking in the entire picture, memorizing it, the number of vehicles, the positions, the quiet rhythm of authority unfolding on her front lawn. and then she looked back at him, calm, present, unhurried. "You have a warrant?" she asked, her voice even, not challenging, just precise. And the question seemed to land heavier than it should have, because Reeves paused, just a fraction of a second, before lifting his chin again. "We have authorization," he replied, choosing the word carefully, as if it carried enough weight to stand on its own. But Angela did not move. Her feet stayed planted against the porch, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady, the kind of steadiness that did not come from ignorance. It came from knowing something the other side did not. And that difference began to press into the space between them, subtle but undeniable. A neighbor's door creaked open down the street. Someone stepping halfway out before stopping, drawn by the sight, but unsure if they should be seen witnessing it. A dog barked once, and then fell silent, like the entire block was recalibrating around this single moment. Angela reached for the doorknob behind her, but did not turn it yet, her fingers resting lightly on the cool metal. And that small detail, that lack of urgency, that absence of panic, rippled through the line of officers more than any raised voice could have. Reeves noticed it too, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger but in assessment, trying to place her, trying to understand why this did not feel like every other call. "Step aside," he said again. But this time there was a slight edge beneath the command, not louder, just tighter, and Angela finally moved, but not the way he expected. She opened the door just enough to slip inside, the hinge giving a soft, familiar creak, and for a second the interior of the house was visible. Simple furniture, clean lines, nothing out of place, nothing that matched the scale of response gathered outside. Then the door closed gently behind her, not slammed, not rushed, just closed, leaving the officers facing a quiet house with flashing lights dancing across its windows. Reeves exhaled slowly through his nose, lifting a hand to signal the team to hold position. No one advanced, no one spoke. The radios quieted again, as if waiting for a cue that had not yet arrived. Seconds passed, then another, stretching longer than they should have, until the stillness began to feel intentional, like a pause written into a script none of them had read. And inside, unseen, Angela Brooks walked across her living room with the same measured pace, the floor cool beneath her feet, the morning light filtering through thin curtains, touching the edges of framed photographs and a small shelf lined with neatly arranged objects that did not draw attention to themselves, but carried weight in their placement. She reached a narrow table near the wall and picked up her phone, her thumb hovering for only a moment before dialing a number she did not need to look up, her expression unchanged, her breathing steady, as if this call was not a reaction but a step she had already anticipated. And outside, Officer Reeves stood at the base of the porch, watching the closed door, listening to nothing, and for the first time since arriving, he felt the situation slip slightly beyond the edges of what he could control. The line clicked once, then settled into a low, steady silence that felt different from any ordinary call. No automated greeting, no delay, just a presence on the other end that waited with purpose. And Angela lifted the phone slightly closer to her ear, her voice calm, measured, carrying none of the tension outside. "This is Angela Brooks," she said, each word clear, deliberate. "I need you to verify a situation at my residence." And she paused, listening, her eyes drifting briefly toward the front window where the pulsing lights painted shifting patterns across the wall, red, blue, red again, like a heartbeat trying to control the rhythm of the moment. But inside the house the air remained still, grounded, untouched by urgency. "Yes," she continued after a beat, her tone unchanged. "They are already here." Another pause, longer this time, and something subtle shifted in her expression, not relief, not concern, just confirmation, as if a sequence had been set in motion exactly as expected. Outside, Officer Reeves adjusted his stance again, his gaze fixed on the door, his jaw tightening slightly as the seconds stretched further, the absence of movement beginning to weigh heavier than any resistance could have. One of the younger officers leaned in slightly toward him, lowering his voice, asking if they should proceed, but Reeves did not answer immediately, his attention still locked on that quiet, closed door, because something about the timing felt off, not wrong, just not aligning with the pattern he knew, the pattern he trusted. He had seen hesitation before, fear, delay, confusion. But this was none of those. This was controlled, intentional, and it unsettled him in a way he could not name. A radio crackled faintly at his shoulder, a dispatcher checking in, routine, expected, but the sound seemed sharper now, louder against the stillness. He lifted his hand slightly, signaling for silence again, and the small movements along the line of officers stilled once more, boots planted, shoulders squared, waiting, always waiting for direction. Inside, Angela shifted her weight as she listened, her bare feet pressing lightly into the cool floor. Grounding her, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen blending with the distant murmur of voices outside. Two separate worlds divided by a single door. Understood, she said quietly into the phone, her tone respectful but firm, the kind of tone that did not ask for permission, it acknowledged alignment. I will remain here. Another pause, and then, softer, almost imperceptible, thank you. She lowered the phone slightly, but did not end the call yet, as if waiting for something final, a confirmation that would not be spoken out loud. And then the line went silent, not disconnected, just complete. She set the phone back down on the table with care, the soft contact of plastic against wood sounding louder than it should have in the quiet room. And for a moment she stood there, still, her gaze unfocused, as if listening to something beyond the physical space around her. Then she turned, walking back toward the front door with the same measured pace. No rush, no hesitation. Outside, Reeves exhaled again, longer this time, the tension in his chest beginning to shift into something sharper, more focused. He stepped forward one pace, then stopped, his eyes narrowing slightly as his radio suddenly burst to life with a tone he had not heard before, not the standard dispatch frequency, not the usual coded chatter. This was different, higher priority, unfamiliar. He reached for it instinctively, bringing it closer, his expression tightening as the voice on the other end came through, clear, controlled, and unmistakably authoritative, not loud, not aggressive, but carrying a weight that did not need volume to command attention. Reeves did not speak at first, he just listened, and as he did, the color in his face shifted almost imperceptibly, the certainty he had carried onto the street beginning to fracture at the edges, not gone, but no longer absolute. The officers around him noticed it too. The way his posture changed, the way his shoulders stiffened instead of relaxed, the way his eyes flicked briefly toward the house as if seeing it for the first time, not as a target, but as something else entirely, something that had not been on the briefing, something that did not fit the report. And then, slowly, deliberately, Reeves lowered the radio from his ear, the air around him heavier now, charged with a different kind of tension, the kind that did not come from confrontation, but from realization. Reeves kept his eyes on the house, but his focus was no longer fixed in the same way. Something had shifted, subtle but undeniable, like the ground beneath him had tilted just enough to throw off his balance without anyone else noticing. The radio in his hand felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of what had just come through it. The voice had not shouted, had not demanded, and yet it carried a level of authority that did not leave room for interpretation. It had spoken in calm, measured terms, identifying a jurisdiction he had not been briefed on, referencing a classification he did not have clearance to question, and for a moment he had simply listened, standing there in front of a quiet house that suddenly felt very different from what it had been 5 minutes ago. One of the officers behind him shifted again, whispering something about proceeding, about maintaining control of the situation. But Reeves did not respond, his jaw tightening as he replayed the words in his. The air did not move, but everything inside it changed. Reeves lowered his hand slowly, the radio still warm against his palm, and for the first time since the operation began, he did not issue a command. He simply stood there, eyes fixed on the front door as if expecting it to open on its own. But it remained closed, still, ordinary, and yet no longer ordinary at all. The flashing lights continued their rhythm, red and blue washing across the siding, across the windows, across the officers' line behind him. But the meaning of that light had shifted. It no longer felt like control. It felt like exposure, like something was being revealed instead of enforced. Sir, one of the officers said again, quieter this time. Uncertain now. What are our orders? And that word, orders, seemed to echo differently in Reeves' head. Heavier, layered, no longer coming from him alone. He inhaled slowly, the cool morning air filling his lungs, grounding him, buying him a second to think. But the thought would not settle. It kept circling back to the same point, the same realization that had begun to form the moment that voice came through the radio. This was not his scene anymore, not his authority, not his call. He turned slightly, just enough to glance at the line of cruisers behind him. The officers waiting, watching, trusting him to lead. And for the first time, that trust felt misplaced, not because he had failed, but because he had been placed in a position he was never meant to control. The front door opened then, quietly, without force, without urgency, just a simple movement of wood on hinges, and Angela Brooks stepped back onto the porch, her expression unchanged, her posture the same, calm, steady, as if the last several minutes had not carried any weight at all. The light caught her face now, soft gold from the rising sun blending with the fading blue from the patrol cars. And in that moment, she did not look like someone surrounded. She looked like someone standing exactly where she was supposed to be. Reeves watched her carefully, every detail sharper now. The way she held her shoulders, the way her gaze met his without challenge or fear, the way she did not ask what was happening because she already knew. And that knowledge settled into him like a quiet pressure, undeniable. "You should stand down," she said, her voice even, not raised, not demanding, just certain, and that certainty carried more weight than any shouted command could have. A few of the officers shifted behind him, confusion flickering across their faces, their eyes moving between Reeves and Angela, waiting for the hierarchy to reassert itself, but it did not immediately. Reeves held her gaze for a long second, longer than protocol would suggest, longer than habit would allow, because he was measuring something he could not see, something he could only feel in the shift of the moment, the way control had slipped without resistance, the way authority had been replaced by something quieter but far more absolute. His jaw tightened slightly, then relaxed, the decision forming not from instinct, but from recognition. He reached up to his shoulder and pressed the radio again, his voice lower now, controlled, but no longer the same. "All units," he said, pausing just long enough for the words to settle before continuing, "hold position." The officers behind him froze in place, the instruction landing with confusion but also obedience, because it was still his voice, still his command, even if it carried a different weight now. Reeves took one step back from the porch, not retreating, not surrendering, just creating space, acknowledging a boundary that had not been visible before. Angela did not move. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable but not cold, not distant, just present, as if she understood exactly what it cost for him to make that shift. The street remained silent, neighbors still watching from behind curtains, the morning light growing stronger, washing away the flashing colors one slow second at a time. And in that quiet transition, the scene began to change, not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, undeniable ways. The tension loosening, the edges softening, the sense of confrontation dissolving into something else, something closer to understanding, and Reeves stood there in the middle of it, no longer the center of control, but not entirely removed either, caught in the moment where authority meets truth, and realizes it does not belong there anymore. The command had been given, but the world did not snap back into place. It did not reset the way it usually did when a situation was brought under control. Instead, the stillness deepened, stretching across the street like a quiet tide. And for a moment no one moved. Not the officers, not the neighbors behind their curtains, not even the wind that had been brushing lightly against the trees at the edge of the block. It was as if the entire scene had paused to reconsider itself. Angela remained on the porch, her bare feet steady against the wood, her arms relaxed at her sides, her breathing slow and even, and the light had shifted again, the early morning sun rising just enough to wash over the front of the house in a soft, warm glow that began to dissolve the sharp edges of the flashing patrol lights, turning red and blue into something muted, something less certain. Reeves felt it too, that change in atmosphere. The way the pressure in his chest eased slightly but did not disappear, replaced by something more complex, something quieter. His eyes moved across the scene in front of him, not searching for threat anymore, but trying to understand the shape of what he had stepped into. The radio at his shoulder remained silent now, but its silence carried weight. A confirmation that what he had heard was not a mistake, not a miscommunication, but a boundary drawn somewhere far above his level. And he could feel it without seeing it, like a line in the air that could not be crossed. One of the officers behind him shifted again, the sound of gravel under his boots soft but noticeable in the quiet, and another adjusted the strap on his vest, small human movements that broke the illusion of control they had arrived with. The formation loosened just slightly, not enough to be called retreat, but enough to show uncertainty, and that uncertainty spread slowly, like a ripple moving outward from a single point. Angela watched it all without expression, not with satisfaction, not with judgment, just with awareness, as if she had seen this shift before, as if she understood exactly how it would unfold. She took a single step forward, not off the porch, just closer to the edge, the wood creaking faintly beneath her weight, and that small sound seemed louder than it should have been, drawing every eye back to her. Reeves noticed the detail again, the calm in her posture, the absence of urgency, the way she did not need to raise her voice to hold the entire scene in place, and something in him adjusted in response, not outwardly, not enough for anyone else to name, but internally, a quiet recalibration of where authority truly sat in this moment. The morning air carried the faint scent of cut grass from somewhere down the street, blending with the lingering heat from the patrol car engines, creating a strange contrast of ordinary and extraordinary that made the scene feel suspended between two realities. One where this was just another call, another house, another routine, and another where none of those things applied. Reeves lowered his gaze briefly, not in submission, but in thought, his mind moving through training, protocol, expectation, and finding none of it quite fit what was happening now. When he looked back up, Angela was still there, unchanged, steady, her presence not expanding, not shrinking, just existing with a certainty that did not require reinforcement. And in that moment, the weight of the situation settled fully into him, not as pressure, but as clarity, the kind that arrives quietly and leaves no room for argument. He exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders in a controlled release, and without raising his voice, without turning it into an announcement, he spoke again. All units, stand by. The words softer this time, not a command to act, but a command to wait, and the officers behind him responded in kind, their movements slowing, their posture easing, the line no longer rigid, the scene no longer fixed, just held in a fragile balance between what had been and what was about to be understood, and Angela Brooks stood at the center of that balance, not as a force pushing against them, but as a truth they had not been prepared to face. It happened quietly, almost too quietly to notice at first, the kind of shift that does not arrive with noise but with absence. The radios stopped crackling altogether, not fading, not breaking, just stopping, and that silence carried more authority than any command that had come before it. Reeves felt it immediately, the way his grip on the situation slipped, not because he lost control, but because something higher had taken it away, and then his radio came alive again, not with the usual layered chatter, but with a single voice, clear, composed, unmistakably official, the kind of voice that did not need to identify itself twice. Officer Reeves, it said, and hearing his name spoken like that, not through dispatch, not through local command, but through a channel he did not even realize was open, sent a subtle tension through his shoulders. You are to disengage immediately. The voice continued, steady, precise, each word placed with intention. The residents. You are standing in front of falls under federal protection status. A pause followed, not long, but deliberate, as if allowing the weight of that statement to settle fully before continuing. Any further action will be considered a breach of jurisdiction. Reeves did not respond right away, not because he did not understand, but because understanding it meant accepting something he had not been prepared for. His eyes moved slowly back to Angela, standing there exactly as she had been. Unchanged, unaffected, as if the confirmation he had just received was something she had known long before he did. And in that moment the final piece clicked into place, not a sudden revelation, but a quiet alignment of everything that had fell off since the beginning, the calm, the timing, the call, the way she had not reacted like someone under pressure. It was never defiance, it was certainty. One of the officers behind him took a small step forward, confused by the lack of movement, sir? He asked, his voice lower now. Unsure, Reeves lifted a hand without looking back, a simple gesture to hold. And this time the gesture carried something different, not authority imposed, but authority redirected. He brought the radio closer again, his voice controlled, respectful in a way it had not been before. Confirm federal designation, he said, not as a challenge, but as a procedural acknowledgement. The response came instantly. No hesitation, no static, just clarity. Confirmed, the voice replied, followed by a string of identifiers that Reeves recognized enough to know they were real, even if he did not have the clearance to interpret them fully. And that was enough. More than enough. He lowered the radio slowly, the final trace of uncertainty leaving his expression, replaced by something quieter, more grounded, acceptance. He turned slightly to face the line of officers behind him, and for a brief moment, he saw them differently, not as a unit under his command, but as individuals waiting for direction in a situation none of them had been trained to recognize. We are done here, he said, his voice even, not raised, but carrying clearly across the front yard. A few heads turned, a few brows furrowed, but no one questioned it, because something in his tone made it final, not optional, not temporary. Final. The formation broke slowly, not in disorder, but in controlled movement. Officers. Stepping back, radios lowering, the tight line of presence dissolving into something more human, more uncertain. Angela remained on the porch, watching it all unfold without expression, not triumphant, not relieved, just steady, as if this outcome had always been the only one possible. Reeves hesitated for a fraction of a second, then took one more step back from the porch, creating a distance that had not existed before, not physical, but understood, and as he did, the morning light fully overtook the scene, the red and blue reflections fading against the growing gold of the sun, the street returning slowly to itself, but not entirely the same, because something had been revealed, something that could not be unseen, and in that quiet, undeniable moment, the balance of power did not shift with force, it simply settled into its rightful place. The engines began to quiet one by one, not all at once, but in a slow, staggered rhythm that felt almost respectful, as if the street itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. The flashing lights dimmed as officers reached into their vehicles, switching them off without needing to be told, and the sharp colors that had dominated the scene faded into the soft, natural tones of early morning, leaving behind only the hum of idling cars and the faint sound of footsteps shifting across pavement. Reeves remained where he was for a moment longer, watching as the line dissolved into motion, doors opening, radios lowering, heads turning away from the house that had just redefined their presence there. And then he stepped forward again, but this time there was no tension in the movement, no command behind it, just intention, measured and deliberate. He stopped at the base of the porch, not climbing, not closing the distance further than necessary, respecting a boundary that had become clear without being marked. Angela stood above him, still, composed, her expression unchanged but not distant, her eyes meeting his with the same quiet steadiness they had held from the beginning. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence between them no longer sharp or uncertain, but settled, understood. Reeves cleared his throat slightly, not out of discomfort, but as if acknowledging the weight of what needed to be said. Ms. Brooks, he began, his voice lower now, stripped of the authority it had carried before, replaced by something more human, more grounded. There has been a misunderstanding. The words felt insufficient even as he said them, too small for what had unfolded, but they were what he had, and he did not try to dress them up or soften them beyond their truth. Angela did not respond immediately. She simply watched him, giving the moment space to exist without rushing to fill it. And that space made his next words clearer, more deliberate. This should not have happened, he continued, his gaze steady, not avoiding hers, not looking past her, but meeting her directly in a way that acknowledged more than procedure. It acknowledged impact. The officers behind him continued to move, some already returning to their vehicles, others standing in small clusters, their posture no longer rigid, their voices low, uncertain, but respectful. The scene had shifted completely now, not just in action, but in tone, in meaning, in what it represented. Angela finally moved, just a small motion, a slight tilt of her head as if considering his words, not judging them, just weighing them. "You were doing what you were told," she said quietly, her voice calm, even, and there was no accusation in it, no edge, just a statement of fact that carried its own kind of understanding. Reeves blinked once, the response not what he expected, not because it excused anything, but because it reframed it, and that reframing settled into him more deeply than any direct criticism could have. "That does not make it right," he replied after a moment, and there was no defensiveness in the words, only acknowledgement. Angela held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible motion that did not signal agreement or forgiveness, but recognition, and that was enough, more than enough. The distance between them remained, but it no longer felt like separation, it felt like balance, like 2 points understanding where they stood without needing to close the space. Reeves stepped back. Again, this time fully, turning slightly toward his vehicle, the movement quiet, unforced, and as he did, the last of the patrol lights shut off, the street returning to its original stillness, the kind that belonged to early morning rather than intervention. Angela watched as the officers continued to leave, one car at a time pulling away from the curb, tires rolling softly against asphalt, until the line that had once filled the street was gone, replaced by empty space and lingering quiet. And when Reeves reached his door, he paused, just for a second, glancing back toward the porch, not with authority, not with obligation, but with something closer to respect. Then he got in, the engine starting with a low hum, and the final vehicle eased away from the curb, leaving behind nothing but the soft light of morning and the quiet presence of a woman who had never needed to raise her voice to be heard. The street returned to itself slowly, not all at once, but in quiet layers. The last patrol car turning the corner at the end of the block, its engine fading into the distance until even that sound disappeared, leaving behind only the soft rustle of leaves and the faint hum of a neighborhood waking up. A screen door creaked somewhere down the street, a neighbor stepping out cautiously as if testing whether the moment had truly passed. Curtains shifted, windows opened just slightly, and life began to move again in small, careful ways. But the air still carried something different, something that had settled into it, and would not leave easily. Angela remained on the porch, her posture unchanged, her bare feet still grounded against the wood. The warmth of the morning sun now fully replacing the artificial glow that had dominated the space before. She drew in a slow breath, the kind that filled her chest without strain, and let it out just as steadily, her shoulders relaxing not from relief, but from completion, as if something that had been set in motion long before this morning had now reached its natural end. She turned slightly, her hand brushing against the doorframe as she stepped back inside, the motion quiet, unhurried, the door closing behind her with a soft click that echoed gently in the stillness. Inside, the house remained just as it had been, simple, orderly, untouched by the tension that had gathered outside. Sunlight filtered through the curtains in thin, golden lines, settling across the floor and the edges of furniture, catching dust in the air that drifted slowly, undisturbed. Angela walked across the room with the same measured pace, her fingers briefly grazing the surface of the table where her phone rested, not picking it up, not checking it, just acknowledging its presence before continuing on, as if the call that had changed everything did not need to be revisited, because its purpose had already been fulfilled. Outside, the street held its quiet, but it was no longer the tense silence of anticipation. It was something softer, something deeper, the kind of quiet that follows understanding, that follows a moment when something unseen becomes clear. A car passed at the far end of the block, slow, careful, as if respecting the space it moved through, and the sound of it blended into the morning without disruption. Angela paused near the window, her gaze drifting outward, not searching, not watching for anything in particular, just present, her reflection faintly visible in the glass, layered with the image of the street beyond, two realities overlapping for a moment before settling back into one. And in that reflection there was no sign of what had just happened, no trace of conflict or tension, only a woman standing quietly in her home, grounded, steady, whole. She reached up and adjusted the curtain slightly, letting more light in. the brightness filling the room in a way that felt intentional, like a closing note that did not need to be spoken. And then she stepped away, moving deeper into the house, her figure disappearing from the window as the curtain fell back into place. Outside, the neighborhood continued to wake, doors opening, voices low and casual, the ordinary rhythm returning piece by piece. But beneath it all, something remained. A memory not held in words or headlines, but in the quiet recognition that had passed through the street, that power does not always arrive with noise, and strength does not need to prove itself to be real. And as the morning settled fully into place, the only thing left behind was the kind of silence that does not feel empty, but complete.